Good morning. And for those of us who are joining us via Zoom, or those of us who are joining us via Facebook Live, we're glad that you are here with us today. Today is the first session in our conversations about for the season of creation. We'll talk about that in just a second, what that means. And today we are going to be looking at a document that came out just this week, and you may have seen it in various media outlets. A document that came out by Justin Welby, who's the Archbishop of Canterbury, Pope Francis, and Patriarch Bartholomew. And so when you put all of those three groups of people together, the Roman Catholic Church, all of Eastern Orthodoxy, and the Anglican Communion, that represents the vast majority of global Christianity. You take out some of the other Protestant churches, you don't have those maybe, but you know, in the American church, we sometimes think that the Episcopal Church is a little church, right? Because we're under 2 million people in the United States. But globally, the Anglican Communion is millions of people, especially in, for example, the church in Sudan is the largest growing church in all of the Anglican Communion right now. And the church in Haiti is the largest diocese in the Episcopal Church. So we sometimes have to open up our eyes to think about what global Anglicanism looks like, instead of just the Episcopal Church in the United States. So that being said, this is a pretty big deal in some sense that the three of these folks would come together on this issue. And I think it demonstrates how important it is for our time right now, especially, and they presented this statement at this time for two reasons. One, September in many churches is celebrated as creation season. That is, we take the time of the month to focus on issues of creation care, eco-justice, and all of the attendant issues, which are many, around those themes. So that's the first reason. The other is that they wanted to make sure that they presented this statement well in advance of the Glasgow summit in November, which is going to be an international summit on creation and climate change, where leaders from around the world are going to come together to talk about policies with regard to environmental degradation and trying to develop greener ways of living, etc. So that's the reason why that document came out at this time. But what I thought we might do is, you know, I'm not assuming that anyone has read it, but perhaps you have. And so I'm just going to go through some pieces of it, and I encourage you to look for it. It was sent out to anybody who is on the St. John's update list as a separate message, right on, what day was that? That was on Saturday, maybe? Friday. So you may have it in your email. If you don't, it's easy to search by just a joint message for the protection of creation. If you just search on that title, you'll probably be able to find it. You'll find the news stories, and oftentimes there's a link to that.
What's the name of it again?
The joint message for the protection of creation. And the other, if you go to Episcopal News Service, ENS, you'll be able to find it there. And I raise that because that's a wonderful thing you can sign on to get information about many things that are going on in the Episcopal Church. And you'll get them right into your email box if you sign up for that as well. That's another good resource. Speaking of resources, this week, where can people find our resources when they go online, Kelsey?
We're going to have a new page, and it's going to be in the first three headers. If you ever go to the home page, and then you can click there and
on the website,
on the website.
right, which is stjohnsla.org, right. and there'll be a series of other resources that'll go up this week. Just if you're interested in the issue generally, and some other books and resources to look at. Just another thing too, in terms of what we'll be doing in the next several weeks. Next week, we aren't having a presentation because we're having Belize Sunday. We have many Belizean folks in our community. Jim, come on in and move your chair in. We have many people from Belize here, and this time in September is their Independence Day. And so we always have a Belize Sunday, and that's next Sunday. And because it often is accompanied by a lunch and festivities afterwards, we decided that we didn't want to compete with that, which we wouldn't compete with it. So we decided not to meet next week, but we'll continue on after that. The week following, we're going to have a wonderful New Testament scholar by the name of Sylvia Kismat. And Sylvia is Sylvia Kismat, Keesmaat. She's Scandinavian. She's from Canada, and she and her husband, Brian Walsh, are both New Testament scholars. But what's interesting about them, they were with us last year when we studied the book of Romans, but they also have a permaculture farm in Ontario that they use as a demonstration project, and they invite folks to come to learn about more earth-friendly agricultural practices and that sort of thing. So she's a New Testament scholar, an activist, and an active farmer as well. So that will be an interesting time in 2 weeks' time on the 26th. And then we're going to have a week with just us again on the 3rd. On the 10th of October, we'll be welcoming Mari Yorstad, she's a Norwegian, another Scandinavian. But Mari is an Old Testament scholar. She was a student of Ellen Davis's. Some of you know, we had Ellen Davis with us a couple of years ago, talking about her book on agriculture in the Old Testament, but Mari is one of her students. She's now the dean of Vancouver School of Theology, and academic dean. And she has written a book on the images of natural life in the Old Testament. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And she says that those books, those images in the Old Testament are not just metaphors. Like, for example, the idea of the trees clapping their hands. She believes that the worldview of the Old Testament indicates that all of the natural world has personhood. That trees and plants, as well as animals, in a sense, have personhood. They aren't objects, but rather are beings that we are in relationship with. So that's a very different mindset than the way we typically understand of the created world and nature. So that's Mari. Our final present, well, she's a Christian, but that doesn't mean that animism is non-Christian.
Well, I hope she's
Yeah.
not gonna make me feel guilty for eating a carrot.
No. Ask her that question though. When she comes, ask her that question, because it's a great question, and and she has answers for that. But I think, it's sort of the short answer, and I won't answer for her, but my answer for that would be sort of what Native peoples, indigenous peoples think of when they think of that sort of thing, where they give thanks for and honor that being that we need to give us life. And so, but anyway, we'll let her talk about that.
Father Mark,
Uh-huh.
when we do the update next time, could you list the Christian education meetings and the guests, so in case we want to read something?
We have that. In fact, this past week we did it, right? It was on the update this week.
I didn't read it
That's okay, but we did it already. So it's there already. If you go back and look at it, you'll see all the folks.
Okay.
And then our final presenter, we may have somebody else, but they're in the wings right now. We haven't got confirmation, but talking about bring it back locally. Within our diocese, we have a program called Seeds of Hope, which deals with agricultural issues and food justice issues primarily. But Tim Alderson is the director of that program, and Tim's going to be with us talking about the bigger global issues and the local issues on how we might actually think of ways that we can continue to engage in this process of earth justice and just agriculture and food justice in our own communities and in our own.
There is a way, there's a will. Way.
Yes, that's absolutely right.
I just don't
You're
know
right.
yet. Exactly what- but I know
Sure,
you're
sure.
right. I know that's possible.
All right, but we have something going on. here.
Yeah, we lost connection,
We've lost our connection. Okay.
but I am connected to this. So if you want to speak here,
Are we online right now?
yes, we are.
Okay. Okay. So we had perhaps we had you, maybe you've experienced, if you're not with us in person, you might have experienced a little hiccup there, but we're back again, I understand. So glad to have you all here. We're going to talk a little bit about some elements of this joint message for the production of creation that I just want to lift up for us. And again, recommend it, the full text to your reading. The way they start is, and this is when I say they, these three religious leaders, with the experience of the pandemic. And they say that you know, we've all been experiencing a global pandemic, and whether we're rich or poor, weak or strong, some more protected or more vulnerable than others, but all of us globally have faced and are facing this calamity. And they make a wonderful statement by saying that no one is safe until everyone is safe, and that our actions really do affect one another. And that's true, but sometimes you wonder if we all believe that, right? So I think it's instructive that some folks just don't want to play along with reality about that, and others do. So similarly speaking, the issue of climate crisis is a similar situation, that we're all in this together. And what's sort of frustrating is a couple of things, that not everybody thinks that it's such a big deal. And we also wonder, I think, from a local or personal level, what is it that actually can be done because we feel sort of paralyzed because individuals and even small groups of people really can't do a whole lot, you know. I mean, we've gone beyond the days when we would say, well, just sort of live more greenly or, you know, recycle. I mean, those recommendations now seem almost silly in terms of they're important, you know, but in terms of the impact that any one of us or even any group of us can have on a global climate crisis is sort of daunting, right? And so we sort of wonder, gosh, you know, what can happen? And we have this sort of paralysis maybe, or you know, there's one of the deadly sins in the Christian tradition is called acedia or sloth, right? And sometimes we think of it as being lazy. But acedia really means sort of a paralysis, an inability to move or to act, a sense that there's nothing you can do. And so we do nothing. And so we need to move beyond acedia to be able to understand that our actions join with actions of other people, people of goodwill, other people of faith, are important, and that we need to do whatever we can to also encourage the leaders on the national and global stage to engage in practices that are going to attempt to reverse the crisis that we're in. And you know, it is a crisis. It's, you know, some people say, well, don't, you know, I shouldn't use the word crisis. Well, okay, it is a crisis. You know, and we should be alarmed by it. Being alarmed doesn't mean, you know, you don't do anything about it because it's so alarming, but it is something that needs to come to the front burner, right? They then use the scriptural passage that really is the theme of their whole letter, and that is from the book of Deuteronomy 13:19. Choose life that you and your children might live. You know, they set before you life and death, and this day choose life that you and your children might live. And so really, this is an invitation. It's a positive letter because it's asking us choose life. You know, do the things that are going to enhance life, abundant life, which is very much a scriptural image. And then they talk about the fact that September is celebrated with many Christians as the season of creation, and that they are writing this in advance of the November meeting in Glasgow to encourage those leaders there to do whatever possible to engage in these projects. But they also say to listen to the cry of the earth and of people who are poor, examining their behavior, that is wealthier nations, and pledging meaningful sacrifices for the sake of the earth, which God has given us. So one of the people who has been probably the most unrelenting in this issue is Patriarch Bartholomew. He's known in environmental circles as the Green Patriarch because since he became the Patriarch in, I think, 1990, maybe, he has been at the forefront of talking about global climate issues. And in 2015, he made an address to the Oxford Union in England. And some of the things that he says in that sort of are reflected in the statement that we're looking at today. If we value each individual made in the image of God, and we value every particle of God's creation, then we will care for each other in our world in religious terms. The way we relate to nature and the biodiversity of creation directly reflects the way we relate to God and our fellow human beings. So there's a sense in his theology that is in this statement and many of the things that he said about the interrelationship of all human beings and what he calls every particle of creation, right? You think, but what's every particle of creation, right? That's like a subatomic level even, right? As well as human beings and all, right? And that we're all in this sort of web of interconnection. And we don't often think that way. At least I often don't think of life that way, right? I think too often of just sort of my own stuff that I want to get done, right? And not more than that. So he says, we are convinced that the future of humanity is related to the establishment of the culture of solidarity. That's an important theological term. And I think it's worth spending a couple minutes on that. Solidarity, he says, is a term that contains the very essence of social ethos, embracing the pillars of freedom, generosity, and justice. It includes the struggle for a just society and the respect for human dignity beyond any division or discrimination of social class, economic status, or ethnic origin. We are convinced that the future of humanity is closely related to a culture of solidarity. In many ways, we can speak of a crisis of solidarity and a crisis in the natural environment. So what he's arguing for is that this concept of solidarity, and I'm going to dig down into that for just a second, is not that solidarity shouldn't be experienced simply among people, but it should be understood as solidarity with the planet as well. And so what does he mean by solidarity? Well, you may recall back in the mists of your mind, or perhaps if you're too young to remember this, Pope John Paul II, when he was involved in the movement for liberation in Poland at the collapse of the Soviet Union, the whole freedom movement in Poland was called solidarity. And the idea of that was that the solidarity of all the people of the nation in that case, that spirit of solidarity led to direct political action and to reimagining the society. But it only came from a sense that everyone was interconnected. They were in solidarity with each other, right? And so the fact that Patriarch Bartholomew uses this concept of solidarity is not only that we are sort of connected, but we're connected in such a way that together we move in a direction of direct action to achieve God's ultimate hope for the universe. Yeah.
Solidarity, of course, was the name of the labor union, and it was rooted in the whole sanctity of work ethic. You know, that people deserve dignity. Yes. For the work that they do. Yes. And that they can stand in solidarity because they are also contributing to the very culture they're living in. I think that has some important connection.
Yeah. Say more about that. Say what's the connection? And I think.
Well, I just think that the labor movement. I mean, my pilgrimage towards labor union support, you know, has been a long one. But I was a labor union rep, and just seeing that it's in the context of work that we create society, that we create a world, and when we're in solidarity with one another, we work together, and it's through our work that we also, what should I say, improve the world that we live in. So yeah. It's not just people sitting around and demonstrating. In other words, in Poland, they didn't sit around and demonstrate. They were working on the docks. They were working in the cities, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was that Lech Walesa?
Yeah. Lech Walesa.
Is that-
Lech Walesa.
Well, okay.
it one of your relatives? Oh, he's one-
Probably on some in some distant planet, I guess,
On
maybe.
Ancestry.com, probably. But what you said about solidarity, what you said also, I think that when we're in solidarity, people, and I understand being in solidarity with everything, that is our biblical charge, that we have the care of the earth. But when we're in solidarity, my observation is we become influencers. So if all of Poland is in solidarity about work, as you said, that is a motivator, if you will, an influencer model, so that, let's say, Brazil says, they're in solidarity, they're influencing this, they're making this global, this global endangerment real. So when we're in solidarity, we also have more power.
Yes, yes, that's
Okay.
right. You know, Chris, and that's I think just playing off that concept in terms of what he's talking about is solidarity of Christian people too. In that, you know, that while we are citizens of any particular country, right, like Poland, the United States, whatever it is, we are citizens of those places. But on a much more profound level, as Christians, we're citizens of heaven together, right? And so if you think about global Christianity being in solidarity, that's a tremendous potential force for change and power, right? That if we understand ourselves as not simply citizens of our own nation, but we're joined with Christians in Africa and South America and Europe and Canada and Australia and Asia or wherever, that can be potentially a source for tremendous power if in fact we engage together in the work of political action to try to make those sorts of things happen. And that's the hard part, right? So anyway, so that's that concept of solidarity. And what they also talk about in this letter here, and I hearken to that a little bit because I think that sort of is in the background of what they're talking about here, even though they don't talk about that issue of solidarity in this letter itself.
If you would reference where you're reading, so I can.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, now I'm going to move into now, and I'm just, you know, I'm just sort of like strolling through this letter, right? So there's no like real like piece by piece. So the section I'm thinking of right here is going to move into now is the importance of sustainability as the heading of that one. In our common Christian tradition, the scriptures and the saints provide illuminating perspectives for comprehending both the realities of the present and the promise of something larger than we see in the moment. The concept of stewardship, of individual and collective responsibility for a God-given endowment, presents a vital starting point for social, economic, and environmental sustainability. In the New Testament, we read of the rich and the foolish man who stores great wealth of grain while forgetting about his finite end. Skipping a little bit on there. Moving down to the next paragraph. We have maximized our own interest at the expense of future generations. By concentrating on our wealth, we find that long-term assets, including the bounty of nature, are depleted for short-term advantage. Technology has unfolded new possibilities for progress, but also for accumulating unrestrained wealth. And many of us behave in ways which demonstrate little concern for other people or the limits of the planet. Nature is resilient, yet delicate. We're already witnessing the consequences of our refusal to protect and preserve it. Now, in this moment, we have an opportunity to repent, to turn around in resolve, to head in the opposite direction. We must pursue generosity and fairness in the ways that we live, work, and use money instead of selfish gain. And then the next whole section is about the impact about people living in poverty. And again, think of this idea of solidarity in the background, right? So, yeah.
A question, I noticed that what was missing here, our passage of scripture that I would have included would have been the Joseph story about how they saved up for 7 years because of the famine that was coming.
Oh, yeah.
Now, but I think the emphasis here is on letting go of wealth immediately instead of saving it up. But when rich people or irresponsible people save to the extent that they cannot expend money on current projects that are important for the welfare of society, I understand that's the critique, that what they're critiquing there. But there is a balance to that you do have to think about the future. And I would like to have seen that example there, because we do have to look to the future and how we can have 7 lean years after we've had 7
Well,
good
you know, I mean, that's, you know, any document like this I always think a document like this is a diving board, right?
Sure.
It allows the rest of us to say, hey, think about this one too, right? So
Right,
that's, but I think what they're trying to say here is that what we've done in terms of hoarding
Yeah.
our wealth and our extraction from the environment
Right.
has not allowed us to think about the replenishment and the renewal of all of those resources. And I think that's why they're trying to
Or
go
using
there.
the money now to relieve the what should I say, the discomfort or the, of poor people and people.
Well, yeah, and
Society in general.
they also talk about the disproportionate effect that the global climate crisis has had on poor people.
Right.
We can see that right in our own nation, right? I mean,
Oh,
if you look at what happened just in Hurricane Ida, right? People who weren't able to escape. The people who were disproportionately affected were people who were really poor folks. And then if you think about what happened, Ida goes up the coast and hits Queens, and immigrant folks who all they can afford is basement apartments,
Right.
where many people are living together. And those are the very apartments that get totally flooded and they lose everything and sometimes their own lives. So the issue is a bigger one, right? It does have to do with poverty and injustice, as well as the global climate crisis. And if you talk about, for example, in developing nations, the drought in many parts of Africa, as probably you know, Paul, is great, and trying to get potable water to people in lots of parts of the world is really a big issue. So the water issue is a huge one in a lot of places. I mean, you could probably speak to that much more than I can. Can you want to say anything about any of that, like the situation, the global crisis, climate crisis in an African context?
Thank you, Father. I think it's been an ongoing issue for years, and it's not gotten much better over time. Even though the United Nations and I believe the World Bank have had projects over time, kind of dig wells and all that, but it's still a perennial issue that hasn't been really solved over the years. But it's good at least people are talking about it. Places like Sudan, and I believe there are other places around kind of the desert parts of Africa that have water shortages, and clean water is the issue here. Like,
Yes.
we do have swamps and all that. Water that's not treated enough, fit for drinking.
Yes.
Another image that pops into my mind that as soon as you mentioned that, well, early on when you were talking about the impact on the poor, you remember the scene in Parasite where the basement apartment gets flooded, and that is terrifying. That is the most terrifying scene I think in the whole movie. is where they go home to their apartment and it's been a bad rainstorm. And the overflow from the sewers is like chest high in their basement apartment. That's reality.
So that's right. So you have places where water is flooding and storms and all of that. And then you go to the Western United States and there's, even in our own country, there's drought, right? So the whole climate balance is out of balance.
Well, let's get a pipeline going from Louisiana.
Well, there you go. Maybe that's one solution. So anyway, the next section is about the impact of people.
With the separation of climate with regards to water between east and west. I don't recall if you had one of the presenters be from our Native American or indigenous tribes. And I'm curious as to what their intelligence, ancestral intelligence tells us to, I guess my thinking is always that they were dancers and brought rain. And I'm curious about in Africa, is that something that the African tribes go back to at all to draw rain to the areas that need rain? Just something that's come to mind. Thank you.
I think, one of the things that Ellen Davis talks about, who's the teacher of one of our presenters, she teaches in Sudan. And in the summer times, usually, I think it is, when she's not teaching at Duke. And one of the things that she has said is that the world of a lot of her African students in Sudan is so much closer to the world of the Bible than she has experienced as a wealthy North American woman, and and I think Mara Yorstad and probably also Sylvia as well are probably going to talk about the fact that the wisdom of the Bible is very close to a lot of the wisdom of indigenous peoples around the globe in terms of some of these issues. So if they don't talk about that, you might put that question in your mental file and raise that again to talk about maybe the conjunction between the wisdom of native peoples and the wisdom of the Bible, because I think there's a lot of connection there. But we'll let the experts talk about that when they come to visit us. So what they also talk about in this letter is what they call the imperative of cooperation. The imperative of cooperation. And that again, that goes back to this concept of solidarity, that anything that we do it has to be done in a sense of cooperation, not just by Christians, but all people of differing faiths and just people of goodwill around the globe, that we can join together in that regard. These crises, they say, present us with a choice. We are in a unique position either to address them with short-sightedness and profiteering, or seize this as an opportunity for conversion and transformation. If we think of humanity as a family and work together towards a future based on the common good, we could find ourselves living in a very different world. Together, we can share a vision for the life where everyone flourishes. Together, we can choose to act with love, justice, and mercy together we can walk towards a fair and fulfilling society with those who are most vulnerable at the center. So that's different too, right? So the folks that are most vulnerable are not just the living in the fallout of what we do, but if we center how our actions affect the most vulnerable, see the difference there? The way that most global economic and social networks work is to engage and accumulate wealth in the centers being developed world, and then the poor and developing nations are on the outskirts of that, and very little concern is given to that. Now, what they're saying is, well, what if we centered that experience first of all? What if we said, how are the actions that we're making, the decisions that we're making, on a planetary scale, on a business scale, what are the echoes of those decisions among the most vulnerable? What if we ask that question? What if global businesses ask those questions? What if developed nations ask those questions? And again, that doesn't say that they're not presenting a solution. They're presenting a philosophy in which we can address some of these issues.
Haven't we seen that in terms of COVID, the vaccination issue with COVID? The COVID has mutated apace in countries where we haven't been able to get them vaccinations because we're making sure that all the industrialized countries have theirs. But it's impacting now us, like the Delta variant is affecting us now because we have failed to take care of the poorer nations where it was running amok.
Right. I think, that's a great example, I think, of it's a real world example in real time about about the bigger issue, which is a little less easy to analyze in real time, right? Because you're right. I mean, one of the frustrating things about the pandemic is that we haven't understood it truly as a global crisis, that we understand it that way, but we haven't acted that way, right? So there's plenty of places in the world where vaccination rates are very low, where the virus continues to spread and continues to mutate. Wherever you have a population that's not vaccinated, you're going to have multiple iterations of virus, which every generation of a virus is a couple hours, right, Paul? So you have these multiple iterations, and of course, you're going to get a genetic mistake. Some of those genetic mistakes are going to make it more viral. I mean, it's just simple science, right? And if you're not stopping, as you're suggesting, the spread of virus with vaccination, and you're not providing the ways for people to get the vaccine because they don't have the resources to either produce it or to distribute it in an appropriate environment, then it's going to happen. I mean, one of the crazy things is that India, right, the place where most vaccines are produced, the population of India wasn't getting vaccinated. So I mean, so this is the whole idea of how global economies also have an influence on some of these things. And then you just take that example, one little example of COVID, which is an environmental natural issue as well, and you multiply that to global climate issues or food production or water distribution and all of these other things. It's really the same thing working itself out in multiple contexts. Yeah.
Where I woke up in my car, and I woke up and I heard some music from somewhere in Beverly Hills, the street. And I looked and I see this Zumba class, and they're all dancing, and they're all going to the beat, and they're all moving in solidarity. And I think that's what it is, that it's like a flash you know, those flash dances or whatever, those where they go. And right, yeah, that's it. And, you know, if one person's out, it just doesn't work, you know? And it's just, it looks silly. And like in 1 Corinthians 13, I'm like a noisy clanging climb, you know, if I don't have the love in my heart and the things like this, that just, you know, I think that's what we need most, and what you're talking about, I really feel is gifting God. Thank you.
The other thing too is that this is not necessarily demonstrating particular policies. It's about what's the mindset that we have going into the production of policies. So for example, this is why, you know, that this document is not saying to the Glasgow summit, you need to endorse particular policies on how this is going to be done, right? It's about giving them the pair of glasses to use to engage in policy discussions, right? So there could be policies that some people might think are, oh, well, why would you do that? Well, because, you know, even though it might not be part of what you normally would think about, you know, it might be the best way to achieve this desired end, right? And so they're not telling them, you know, how to do it, but why they should be doing it, I guess would maybe be the question.
Kind of austerity or prescribing austerity.
Oh, I'm glad you used that word, Richard. Actually, well, and yes and no. I think there is a sense in which
Austerity.
austerity. There is a sense in which, you know, there was a letter that was published in the New York Times by Archbishop Welby and Patriarch Bartholomew back in 2017, I think it was. And they used the term frugality, right? Which maybe is a better word, maybe, you know. I think because frugality refers to, and I'm going to use a different word in a second. Frugality, I think, gives the notion that we're going to be sensible in what we use. You know, austerity, I think, gives the impression of nobody can have any fun, right? Or you you can't use anything, you know, or that we now are a place where it's a scarcity mentality. I think that at the same time as we're saying these things, we need to think of an abundance mentality, but a frugality mentality. And Archbishop Bartholomew or Patriarch Bartholomew and other places within the Orthodox tradition talks about the principle of asceticism. And that's another word that we don't like very much because we think of asceticism in its negative context. But the ascetic movement, or in the monastic tradition, in both East and West, highly values and prizes the beauty and the enjoyment of creation, but does it in such a way that we don't use up everything, and we don't think that everything is ours to use. But we use things in a way that is beneficial not only to ourselves but to everyone. It's sort of like, you know, the ability to share, right? Very simple. Like, what's that book? All I learned, needed to learn, I learned in kindergarten. The ability to share, right? And if we put that on a global basis, you know, that's. But the idea of the ascetic model or the model of frugality, I think, is different from austerity because it recognizes the abundance, that there's an abundance, but we use that abundance in a mindful way, right? Let's take food production as an example.
Let me give you something even simplistic and maybe
Sure,
it's kind of
sure.
what you're saying. About 5 years ago, I went with Bishop Mary to Cuernavaca to study Spanish, right? And I left my toothpaste at home. So I went to the market and there were like 10, maybe 12 choices of toothpaste. And so I purchased one, I brought it home. Then I went to my local CVS to get the one I really liked, right? There were like 60 choices of toothpaste. And I had never thought about it before. And I thought, why do we need 60 choices of toothpaste? That's overabundance or overuse or overconsumption. That's what I was looking for. Overconsumption. Have we ever thought about that? Have we ever actually given any consideration? Have we ever said we don't need all that toothpaste? 15 will do us. But the next time you go into your CVS or Walgreens or wherever you go, there's an entire row of just one item, toothpaste. And that's sort of what you mean, just
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's
So much.
that's the way to. I think you're getting at the way of thinking. I don't. I'm agnostic about toothpaste, but but I think you're onto something in the way you're thinking. See, these are the glasses, right?
okay.
This is exactly what they're asking us to do.
Okay.
Put on a new pair of glasses and start looking at things that way.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, it's like the, we'll say in San Francisco, there used to be a big lobster trade and they took all the lobsters and now there isn't any big lobster trade, so in a sense, yeah, these say clams, oysters, lobsters or so forth at a certain point, they're reproducing and there's an abundance of them and it'll last forever unless you take all of them and then it's gone, and but I think the thing that I have to fight against is despair because, something we've been thinking about for decades and just seems like, are we ever going to be able to pull up our socks and really address this? And so it's the despair that I have to fight against, the acity or however you pronounce it.
I was just going to say that the issues at stake, this is a big part of the conversation that I believe all of us should be having. But my thought process is how influential are the, say for this, in this case, the paper that's being presented and the meetings that are going to follow after. How are they going to be able to influence the politics of our nations, as a corporate, in a corporate sense, to ensure that it's not just talk like we're really good at, but real action that makes us see results.
That's a huge issue, I think, Paul, in terms of that. And I think that one of the really dark issues here is the decline of the influence of the religious mindset, not just Christian, but the spiritual religious imagination, let's put it that way, on global decision-making, governments and United Nations and all of that sort of thing, that we've sort of so relegated the spiritual ways of thinking and even language, right, to the margins, that you hope and wonder that things like this can be positions that are at the table when these conversations are going on, and hopefully there are lobbyists, in which they always are, right, on the sidelines of these meetings that are trying to influence the conversation. But I think one of the real negative effects of secularization is that the religious mindset is discounted, or people say things like, well, Christianity is anti-environment because in the second chapter of Genesis, it says, dominate. It doesn't say that, by the way, but you take like one little verse like that, thinking that that's the whole shooting match. And if you really looked at the logic of the Hebrew Bible in the books of Deuteronomy and Leviticus about farming practices and the way you handle the earth and how the earth has a sort of sense of agency, and you really understand what the Bible really is saying about some of these issues, then you have a different point of view. But I'm sorry, Richard, you were going to say something.
Yes, I hate to kind of be a little bit of a party pooper here, but I'm looking at the global consumption of crude oil, and prior to COVID, it was going up at least 1 million barrels per day per year. And it peaked at 99.7 million barrels per day. COVID did what, what's that name, Therma, the young Scandinavian woman wanted to do. Instantly went down to 91 million. But this year it's popping back 5.5, 96.5, and all the way out to 2026, it's increasing 1 million barrels per day per year. 2026 will be 104.1 million. So we can think about that, but that's what the reality is, and it's very complicated. I'm involved in that somewhat professionally. It's not cheap, and if the world were really convinced to do something, there actually might be real austerity. I'm not saying that that's a bad choice. It might be the best one, but I'm not sure how many people understand how complex it is and how expensive it would be. Thank you.
No, thank you, Richard. I mean, I think you bring that good perspective, and that's one element is fossil fuels, right? And it's a huge one. It's like, well, it's fueling the climate crisis in some way, right? And yeah, you think, okay, what if we looked at even that from a sense of abundance? And I'm just talking here now, right? As I'm hearing that, and those are numbers that one should be really concerned about, but what if we looked at even that with, okay, we have other resources that, and maybe you know more about this than I do. I mean, what if more things like electric vehicles and that sort of stuff were produced more cheaply and more, and we had more, if we put more infrastructural resources into making that easier for people, for example, right? And I don't know, I'm just talking here now. So maybe you have some more thoughts on that.
Well, I do. You have to take out, a square mile of desert to get a decent sized power plant, and a decent sized solar plant. And, no one really likes to live near windmills. They kill birds. They also scar the environment. I'm not convinced that if we, put enough windmills in to power the country, there wouldn't be some negative environmental damage by that. Also, lithium hexafluoride, which is what you get batteries from, is not a clean business at all. And so there's a downside to that. It's very, very complicated. One of my projects, which is a greenhouse gas project, we came out of Abu Dhabi with components. The ship had to make a detour to India, to Kandla and the Gulf of Kutch, pick up 24 turbine blades, take them to Texas. I don't know if they consider the fact that they make the wind turbine blades in India and then put them on a fossil fuel powered ship. It's probably trivial in comparison to the life cycle cost and the carbon footprint. I'm sure green's still green, but I'm not saying it isn't, but it's just very complicated and expensive. And the other thing that most people maybe don't realize, and I'm old enough to remember, before everyone became concerned over climate change, it was that we were running out of oil and that it was a good thing. Oil was great and it was wonderful. And greedy America was hogging it all. And the communist countries were very frugal and kind of better because of that. And we were taking all of this wonderful oil selfishly and not going to let the developing world get their fair share of it. And so now that we don't say that anymore, but the one piece of information that's still relevant is that unless you're looking at over 100 million year time frame, fossil fuels are not renewable. They will be in 100 million years, but not now. So once you use them, they're gone. So whether or not you tax them or prohibit them, I guess if you prohibit them, it wouldn't be an issue. But if you exploit them, at some point there won't be any. And so I don't know what we do. Pray for fusion.
Then I have just a question to ask you. I am attentive to this now and deeply troubled by it. One while, well, no, let me say this first. Part of our challenge in the United States of America is our rallying cry prior to any substantive change is it's about our freedom. It's about our freedom. I have the right. So one while we were not making large cars. Does anybody remember that? Our local automobile manufacturers just simply weren't making these huge things. Now they're doing it again. I'm going down the freeway and I am behind a Cadillac Escalade. Do you know what that is? I did not. But recently, since we started driving again, it is a huge luxury SUV and you literally can't see around it. I'm asking myself, why are we manufacturing a car? And when I did go around it and came abreast of it, there was one person in that car, just one.
You know why we make those cars? I will tell you exactly why. Because most of the expense of making a car is making a car. And so if you make a big car, it costs a little bit more than a small car, but they make a lot more profit off it. So the automobile companies, they love big cars.
I didn't know. But aren't smaller cars, it seems to me, use less fossil fuel, correct? Get better mileage. I don't want to get in a long conversation about cars. I don't have a really, really great understanding of them, but I understand about this move to electricity. But how complex is it? You were saying it was complex. How complex is it to shift us, let's say, just our nation, from these large, profitable cars, right, to smaller, more efficient cars, if you will, which would slow down the use of fossil fuel. Now, am I close?
No, I think you're correct. And it's actually, in my opinion, this is getting into politics a little bit, but also economics, that I think there is some consensus that if you wanted to be greener, it's it would be best to pass a carbon tax, because then instead of you know giving massive subsidies to some great green company that has some wonderful technology that maybe your uncle owns, maybe not, and then that thing going belly up, you would simply tax carbon and then have the market and people make their own decisions. And if you were really wealthy, or you had a gas guzzling car that you only drove once a year or twice a year, you had a muscle car that you hardly put any miles on it, and that was your pride and joy, why not let that person enjoy that muscle car? But if they wanted to drive that muscle car every day to commute to work, they would pay a lot of extra money, and they would think long and hard before they drove that car every day. They might carpool, they might buy a small car to commute, et cetera, et cetera. So that would be one way to, maybe it would be unpopular, maybe it would be some pain, but it would be very effective, and you wouldn't have to worry about squandering money on the wrong technology.
I mean, these are conversations that I think are good to have. I mean, because they on one level, they are very practical. On another level, they're second order in that they do require more policy decisions, obviously. But also then it raises the point of what I think what we're looking at today in these statements of these our spiritual leaders, three people who are again, the leaders of the majority of global Christians, making these statements to lead us, right? That's the point of what they're doing. And again, they don't say that they're scientists. They don't say that they know all the particular policies. But again, they say, when you're making these decisions, put on these glasses to see them, right? And so I think there is a certain amount of humility in terms of what about the policy issues, and understanding that these issues are complex, which I think you rightly state. I mean, even like you're right. I mean, when we're talking about electronic cars, those batteries are really difficult to get rid of once you have them. And when they die, they're what are you going to do with it, right? So that's another whole issue, right? So electric cars aren't just sort of like the only answer. But so as we come to the end here today, these are all elements of this big issue, about greenhouse gases, about food production, about water, about climate change, all of these whole constellation of issues. And the question is, and not to end on a negative note, but do we have the time to actually make a difference about this? That there is a certain urgency that I think we don't want to we always want to put like the best front on it and stuff like that, but there is a certain urgency, I think, that we have to just address, but as people of faith, we also know that if we live into what we're called to do, that there is a creator who is in charge of things, and that but we've been given the opportunity to repent, as they say here, to turn around, to start doing things differently. We have the opportunity to do that, and we can hope that there's enough time for that to happen. Yeah, do you want?
Probably am stating the obvious or restating the obvious here, but I think that one of the things that and I haven't read the document in detail, But the primary motivation, at least from a Christian or a Judeo-Christian perspective, when it comes to solidarity, driving solidarity or motivating solidarity or motivating care for the poor, is loving our neighbor as ourselves. And I think that that probably should have been up there with that Deuteronomy passage. You can't say everything in a paper like this, but in terms of our stance as in the Judeo-Christian tradition, that nothing strikes home or closer to the heart than loving our neighbors as ourselves. And I really wish I had seen more of that in the document.
Great. Again, like you say, I mean, this is a 5-page document, written very quickly, probably. But nevertheless, I think there's a lot there. But you can always say what should have been there, what shouldn't have been there. But I think it's a good point that you make about loving your neighbor. And then then Jesus, the lawyer in Luke's gospel, says to Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" And that's the question I think that we need to think of, because is the tree my neighbor? Yeah, as well as the person next to me, and the person in Latin America, or the person in Africa, or in China. If we're all in this together, if we really believe in solidarity of the planet and all creatures, then all of these folks are our neighbors. So maybe that's a good place to end with, Rob, to think about the question, who is my neighbor, as we move into the next several weeks. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for Jenny and Gloria, who joined us here, and anybody who's with us on Facebook. We're very happy that you were with us too. And next week, we'll be more mindful to ask Jenny and Gloria and anybody who's in the Zoom room to raise their hands next week if you have, or not next week, 2 weeks time. No class next week, but in 2 weeks time when we have Sylvia Kismat as our speaker. Thank you all. Have a good day.
Thank you.